I'll say a little bit about what my organization does, what I do, and then I want to talk about how I got there, because that's how I interpreted Alon's what he wanted me to do, sort of motivation or path. My organization we started around in 2007, and initially it was part of an attempt to create a bridge for Jews and in the diaspora, and also for Israelis of all kinds, Jewish or not Jewish, to work on the challenge of global poverty. And initially I saw it more as an educational mission, but very quickly realized that there was so much more we could do. We began in Kathmandu, Nepal, and we've been there for 14 years. And what we realized was that the root of poverty in many, many places in the world, in South Asia, in sub-Saharan Africa, and some other places, is because much of the population, perhaps the majority of the population, is still connected to subsistence farming villages. But these subsistence farming villages are in crisis. If you go to a village and you ask them, in Nepal, you ask them, how long do you eat? So it means how many months do you eat? So it means how many months can you eat from the food that you grow? Because of the population growth, because of environmental degradation, because of neoliberal policies that have cut off the agricultural extension officers from the government that used to help these villages are not, almost none of them can fully support themselves from their agriculture right now. And that means that many of them are leaving for either very difficult work conditions or for slums. And our goal was to use, help their capacity building in agriculture and with women and with youth, and to help these villages, people who want to remain in the villages, to help these villages become places of opportunity and not the source of impoverishment when they, both in the village and when they leave and are drawn into the slums and the cities. So we've been doing that for about 13 years. We very much believe in working on a community level with the local organizations, but also working intensively enough so that we can make a real difference and for a long term. So we'll go to a village area and we'll work for 3 to 5 years. In terms of faith, part of what we do is we build our work is led by locals. We've worked in Nepal, in Haiti, after the earthquake for 5 years, in Burundi, and now we're beginning also in Zambia in Africa. So our work is led by locals because they're the ones who can really stay for the 3 to 5 year period that really takes to transform a village. But we also, in accordance with our original educational mandate, we bring lots of volunteers. We brought over 1,300 volunteers for periods, smallest period being 1 month, but many people for 4 months or for 6 months or for 1 year or for longer. And to those people, we do teach, try to connect what we're doing with Jewish values and ethics. And in that sense, it is a faith-based organization, and I myself am very much motivated by it. I think the people in the village often don't even know that we're Jews. I mean, the staff does, the Nepali staff does, and I think they appreciate. One of the things that I feel has been wrong with a lot of development work has been that people, the Westerners, come as, we're the universal and you guys are the tribes. And we like to come and say, no, we're just as specific as you. We come from our own particular history, our own tribe, and we're connecting to you as a tribe. No one is universal. There's no such thing as universal. We're all just fragments of a much larger family of humanity, as you said, by Mahinder Singh. So they often don't even know that we're Jews because, to them, Christians, Muslims, Jews, it's all, in Africa, they do. In Africa, they have much more of an awareness because we work mostly with Christians in Africa. So I want to say a bit about how I got to do this. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew in a post-Holocaust community. In other words, most of my father was a refugee from Germany, and the Orthodox Jews in Los Angeles, where I grew up, most of my friends, one parent at least, was a survivor of the Holocaust. And it was the Orthodox Jews were quite an inward directed community. Really, it was about survival. We still felt quite, foreign to the larger society. So even though I did grow up with a sense of connecting Judaism and social justice, I remember for many years, for a few years in Los Angeles, there was no kosher ice cream. After the community got more, but at the same time, we didn't have grapes or lettuce because my mother she was the religious rock in the family. She supported Cesar Chavez and his United Farm Workers. So I did connect those kind of things. And yet it took a while until I really got to connect in a more practical way, Judaism and social justice. I want to just say one experience I had that's not directly connected, but I think was very influential. I became interested in Jewish mysticism when I was about 20. And when I was 22, I went to a yeshiva where we were studying Jewish mysticism. And people say that it's dangerous to study when you're so young, mysticism and before you're married. And in fact, I had a very exalted experience there, and then also had a kind of a breakdown when I left, because the teacher had a heart attack, couldn't teach anymore. I ended up leaving, and I had a kind of a breakdown. And for about a year, I was in a very, very bad condition. And then finally, I had a healing experience with the person who became my primary teacher, Rabbi Shlomo Karlibach. He just gave over some teachings in Torah, and I felt him really healing my inside so that I could take in new experience. But that feeling of having been broken, or that experience, was a very important one for me in terms of this kind of work, because what I felt it gave me, I feel like a lot of times we block out the suffering of other people who are really in pain or in extreme situations, whether sometimes just, individuals, and sometimes even whole classes or groups of people, they're not us. And I think that having experienced, extreme psychological pain, that helped me later on, and then a healing, but it helped me to be able to look at people and to really see them and to feel the life force that's also within the pain. There is also a tremendous life force. Like we like to say that God's presence, his feminine presence called the Shekhinah, hovers over the bed of the sick, or hovers over the people who are in exile. And I really feel that's true, but that you have to, perhaps you have to be a little brokenhearted first to open up and to see that. I really started to get into this idea of trying to make a connection between Judaism and global poverty when I went to Ethiopia. After I moved to Israel, I became a journalist. I'm also a rabbi, but I also am very interested in writing. And I traveled to Ethiopia at the time when the Ethiopian Jews were trying to immigrate to Israel, 1990 and 91. And that was my first introduction to, I don't know what to call it now, Global South, the two-thirds world. And I saw a couple of things. One was how poverty really is not necessarily about being, daily suffering, although it can be, of course. But sometimes, you can have a young boy or a young girl living in a slum, playing with their cousins and brothers with an old bicycle tire, can be much happier than the same young, and then a young person of the same age in a big house in Beverly Hills, playing a video game, but feeling very, very quite isolated. The problem with poverty is the vulnerability and how quickly things can change. The young boy's father breaks his arm because he's a porter or he's working as a farmer, and he somehow physical labor, and then everything changes and there's no food and the family breaks apart. And so that in Ethiopia. And then when there was finally an Operation Solomon, there was a rescue Addis Ababa was surrounded by rebels, and the dictator had fled. And they managed, there was a airlift of the Ethiopian Jews, the remaining 14,500, May 24th, 1991. And I had to decide whether to stay or not for the rebel entry to report on that. And I did stay. And that opened up for me because I felt like it's not only Ethiopian Jews, Ethiopia itself and the people of Ethiopia really it touched me so deeply. So from then on, I started to report from different places. I went to Haiti. In Haiti, I saw slums that were far worse than anything I'd even seen in Ethiopia. And I remember being there on the 9th day of Av, which is the day of kind of national mourning for the Jewish people. It's the destruction of the two temples and the destruction of really Jerusalem, terrible massacres. And I remember looking out at the slums and saying, this is the Jerusalem that's still burning. This is the place where the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God, is still hovering because there's so much suffering there. And I ended up, traveling onwards, going. I reported from Somalia, which was in a terrible condition then, but also was able to see the dignity of communities that even when they were starving, were able to hold fast to their discipline and respect their traditions and their elders. And that was very, very strong for me about something I took with me from the Jewish community too, the strength of community. And then I began to get interested in something else, which was the systematic part of how poverty is produced. I started to get interested in neoliberal globalization and how there had been a whole process in which after the decolonization, there was, then there was, the countries wanted to be very independent and produce their own food and such, have their own factories. But in the 1970s, there was a big effort on the part of the United States and Europe to loan money to countries in order for there to be, development. And they took the money, it was very low interest. Then in the 1980s, the interest went up tremendously and these countries couldn't pay back. And the International Monetary Fund and other World Bank and so on, they now came and said, okay, we'll help you restructure your loan and you won't have to go bankrupt and you'll still be able to buy the oil and gas and the penicillin you need, but you have to do economics the way we say. And that's to allow in foreign investment therefore you have to lower your taxes and you have to stop providing healthcare for your people, stop providing free education, stop providing agricultural extension. So I became very interested in these kinds of systems of how economics work, and it very much connected for me with the Torah and with the Torah's emphasis on justice and on just systems. And I even began to see, I was also visited a hunter-gatherer tribe way off in the borderlands between Ethiopia and Sudan. And I began to think about the movement in the Torah from the Garden of Eden to agriculture, and then how that develops in the Bereshit and Genesis to the last part of it where everyone becomes slaves to Pharaoh because he's accumulated so much grain, and then everyone has to buy the grain and they both become slaves. Then the Israelites become slaves. And then under the liberation, the economy is the manna. Can't be stored. It can't be stored at all. And then what I felt was that the narrative part of the Torah connected with the normative part, where you have the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, where the land goes back to its owners, and really every 50 years, and where you prevent real estate keeps going down the price of land, the forbidding of interest, that underlying, yes, you're integrating agriculture, but underlying it is also a memory of the Garden of Eden, a memory of the manna. And at the same time, the other twist in the double helix of the Torah's narrative with the brothers, Jacob and Esav, Ishmael and Yitzchak, Yosef and his brothers, finally coming to a healing with Moses and Aaron, and that represented by, receiving and embracing your brother, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. So these two things, the system looking at the system, but at the same time understanding that it also all depends on the heart and the fixing of the heart. So these all inspired me, and like I said, I had a desire to create a connection. Orthodox Judaism, it's not that there were very many champions between the wars or in the period before World War II. There was a lot more understanding and how to take the ethics, the Jewish ethics, which had sort of been ghettoized, and to bring it out into the wider world. But it's sort of dissipated after the Holocaust, and I felt that my work, along with other people's work, but was to, my teacher, Rabbi Shlomo Korbach, he said, in this age, we have to fix three things. We have to fix in Orthodox Judaism, we have to fix the relationship to women. We have to fix the relationship between parents and children, and we have to fix the relationship between Jews and other nations of the world. So that was really very much part of my motivation in starting my organization, which is called Tevel B'Tzedek. It's from the Psalms. It means the earth in justice, the earth with justice. So very important for me also to understand, to went through a process of understanding chosenness in relationship to this, and to understand that I always like to compare it to, I feel like my mother, we were 4 children, and each of us felt that we were loved especially the most. And I feel like everyone has the right to feel like their mother loved them more than anyone else. But if they have to believe because of that their brother or sister was not loved the most, that's already pathological. So that's kind of the paradox. I feel that as a Jew, I have the right and the duty to believe that we were touched by God, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that many other groups were also touched by God and loved especially. And that has, I think, helped me in my work in the developing world, where there's so many different kinds of tribes and ethnicities, and how important it is to respect their process and to create a partnership of particularity with them.